and gentlemen, like I said, we've got Honorable Mr. Yunus Karim, who's the former Minister of Communications from year 2013 to 2014. How are you, Mr. Yunus Karim?
I'm fine, my brother. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks to you, Mr. Yunus Karim. How's lockdown?
Well, very challenging, as you know, not just for us here in this country, but globally. And of course, as usual, it's the poor and low-income people who bear the main consequences of this lockdown, the world over, particularly in our country.
Mm-hmm. So, without any further ado, I think let's get down to the interview. So, Mr. Karim, you were, with you being a Minister of Communications, what have you learned from that role to improve your influence in the Finance Committee where you currently sit?
Firstly, I wouldn't want to lay too much of store by the fact that I served as a Minister of Communications. That was a mere 10 months.
I know.
It was from, I think it was July 2013 to the end of May 2014. So it was a very small part of my political activities. In fact, I became politically active in 1971. And interestingly, tomorrow is Youth Day. In 1976, we organized a protest against the massacre of the students in Soweto and in support of uprising there and elsewhere at the University of Durban, Westville, where I came from. It was then a so-called Indian-only university. Hardly ever, because the only Indian university outside of India, of course, but there it was. So three of us, Rashid Mir, who was the son, he passed away, of course, of the famous sociologist and ANC activist Fatima Mir, a good friend of the Mandelas, and Lloyd Badiachi, now a lawyer in Cape Town, and myself were arrested in August 1976, and we were detained till, I think it was December 22nd, 1976, and we were released. But while in detention, actually we were arrested in eThekwini, Durban, and we got transported early one morning together with others like George Sitole, Vitas Mbalase, Norman Dubazana, Govind Reddy from the Institute of Race Relations, and others, Bobby Mari, the trade unionist. And we joined in Tatu Motlana in Modabi prison together with 49 others. The more prominent people that were there were Smagalisa Mokachwa, the journalists from what was then the World that was banned later, Duma, Dlovu, Willie Bukala, Kabu, Tukwana, and so on. So some 49 or so of us were detained there. And then we got released in December. So 1976 Youth Day also is quite significant in my personal life, let alone the political life of our country. And I've been a political activist since 1971 when I was a high school student. I was chairperson of National Youth Action at the time. It was a high school student organization directed towards opposing unequal and segregated education. So if you look at my political life, it's 1971 to 2020, it's about 49 years. So quite frankly, obviously you got high profile as a minister. That's a mere small speck in my life. I don't attach too much of importance to it, my brother. To answer your question more specifically, I say all of this because of the relevance of Youth Day tomorrow. Well, what did I get out of it? Well, the importance of holding even more ministers and government departments to account by Parliament. I got to understand a bit more, serving in those 10 months as a Minister of Finance, the Minister of Communications, how financial issues work, because I had to look at this big industry, this huge portfolio of communications. If you think of the Vodacoms, MTN, Cell Cs, Telkom Mobile, and so on. If you take, for example, Naspers and MultiChoice. Naspers, I think at that stage, was the third largest media company. It emerged from an apologist and a full supporter of the apartheid regime, for which it never apologized in the DRC, may I add. The only media company that didn't. Later, when we tackled them during my term, they again some way did apologize on the 100th anniversary, the lame apology, of course. They did appear before the TRC. So if you look at that industry, I had to understand financial issues more. And I was very privileged and honored to have an excellent team of people who understood the communications industry very well. John Dwapa, David Nedry, a very good DG, and Stuart Mojave. These people gave me a technical understanding also of finance issues in that industry. And I think that helped me to be a slightly more effective chairperson in the finance committee. But interestingly, when I was a minister, I appealed to me, it sounds odd for a minister and a member of the executive. I pleaded to the portfolio committee to hold us to rigorous account. And I said to them, don't take my word for what it appears to be. Interrogate it. And the journalist picked up on that and wrote a long piece about the oddity, I think, of a minister pleading with Parliament to be more effective. But actually, I'm not the only minister who's done that. in close study group meetings of ANC, which is the ANC component of a portfolio committee, parliamentary committee. Other ministers have done that. In the parliamentary caucus of Thursdays, Mr. Trevor Mannion was famous for that. He would always appear in our committee and in our Thursday morning briefings after the budget is presented on a Wednesday and at other times, and people in the parliamentary committees, you'd say, hold me to account more rigorously and vigorously. Hold the executive to account. You are parliament. You ultimately have the power to pass the budget and the like. And other ministers do that too. So what did I gain? I think I answered that, unless you want more of a response.
No, I think we did get a good answer on that. Mr. Karim, what plans does the ANC have in place to empower women when it comes to the number of women that sit in parliament, which amount to 45%, whereas our African brothers amount to, like Rwanda, amount to about 75%?
I wouldn't say Rwanda had 75%. If that's the case, well, I'm learning something. I thought it was slightly over 50%, and it's remarkable, and they should be congratulated. But you can't just put women in positions and feel good about it. Women in general, even in the developed world, and even more in the developing world, even more in our continent, are disadvantaged from the moment they're born to the moment they even get their PhDs. It doesn't follow that a male with a PhD in the same area and a female with a PhD get the same response from industry or from academia and so on in general. So I think that it's important not only to have at least 50% women in the parliaments throughout the world. I think it should be compulsory. 50% at least should be women. I think it's very important that women are empowered to play effective roles. And that is something that's lacking in our parliament and our legislatures and our municipalities. But at the same time, we should be commended, actually. The ANC in particular should be commended because it's our policy that 50% at least of our candidates should be women on the list system in the national and provincial legislatures. It's the other parties that don't have such a quota or provision that bring down the overall percentage. But with the ANC, you can't fault us. I don't know the exact figure, but I think it's slightly around 50 or slightly more than 50% of the ANC members are female. And I think the cabinet's more or less evenly balanced, about 50-50. So I think we've done very well. And we've got quite formidable women, actually. It's not as if, all the women in the parliament. I mean, they're very strong women in the ANC and in government. And, but still, compared to men, they deal with various structural, cultural, historical disadvantages.
The ANC does have quite a number of strong women like Naledi Pandor, Lelo Sisulu, and a few right there that who might somebody to look at.
Yes, because Dlamini Zuma, she's been very involved in the movement from the 70s. She's very rooted there. Another woman, yes.
Mm-hmm. Does the ANC have a succession plan when it comes to including youth in cabinets and committees to learn and gather experience while the experienced ladies and gentlemen are still currently present in those certain portfolios?
Well, I think if you look at the current National Assembly, I think it's the highest percentage of youth ever since 1994. The ANC consciously did that. It brought in a large number of youth, student activists. I mean, people who come literally out of the student movement and gone straight into parliament, and others, people from the Youth League and so on. So I think this time around, this term, a very significant percentage of the National Assembly comprises youth, but also cabinet. In fact, a large number of young people have gone straight into cabinet, which is very unusual. Some of them are deputy ministers, at least many of them, and some of them are certainly ministers, good ministers. The Minister of Small Business and Development is one example, and so on and so on. So I think if you consider what the ANC has done since May 2019, it's highly significant. And it's clear that the generation that came to Parliament in 1994 is more or less out. I mean, the percentage is very low. So I think we've done very well this time around. Also, if you look at the average age of MPs, it's much lower now than previously. It reflects, I think, a global trend where younger and younger people are not just becoming members of Parliament and members of the executive, but presidents too and prime ministers. If you look at Obama, I think he was quite young. He certainly looks very young. And then you have a Canadian prime minister who looks very young to me. There are several others now and then you catch them on Al Jazeera or Russian TV, BBC. You see they look quite young. They look in their 40s. So what I'm saying in short is it's a broader trend. Also because I mentioned it reflects a part of demographics. An increasing composition of the electorate now is quite young. The breakdown of age groups favors youth, I think, more now than before. So I think the EFF has done quite a bit since it first came to Parliament, because the average age of the EFF member is quite low. It's probably the average is the lowest of all political parties. So I think we've done well. But that in itself is not enough. You have to empower youth. And youth doesn't consist simply of members of the National Assembly, obviously. We have to do far, far more. Youth unemployment is very, very high. The youth are, you know more than me, very restless, restive, alienated, not just unemployed, but unemployable, at least in the private sector. You know, they don't have the necessary skills or experience. And in private sector, they often ask, I think, very unfairly for experience. If they've just come out of university or school with a reasonably good matric, what experience are you supposed to have? You know, I mean, obviously they should give you the opportunity to acquire that experience, even through internships. So we have the YES program, for example, which is funded by the private sector. So we need to do far more than we're doing, more than ever now with COVID-19, which will disproportionately affect youth. Large numbers of our people are losing their jobs, and youth unemployment is going to become worse, and employing youth is going to become more challenging. The state has to become more involved within its own budget and other constraints.
You know, Mr. Yunus Karim, last week I was interviewing, I think we do sit on the same committee as Mr. Gordon Hill, who was from Democratic Alliance. I asked him a question.
I'm on the National Council of Provinces side, but the two committees, the Finance Committee and the NTOB, were served, and he's in the National Assembly, the Finance Committee and the National Assembly. We have joint meetings at times, but he's not in the same committee as me, as it were, yeah. Right.
Yes. So I asked him a question about if the DA were in charge, how would they sort out the situation of the missing middle, which when it comes to NSFAS and guys that are called too rich to be applying for NSFAS but are too poor to be paying varsity fees. So now I ask you as a person from the governing party, what strategies would you put in place if you were the Minister of Higher Education or the Minister of Finance? What strategies would you propose to deal with the missing middle?
Well, we do have a Minister of Higher Education and a Minister of Finance. And in the case of the youth sector, we also have in the presidency a focus on youth, a special deputy minister that focuses on that. And I think more needs to be done within the constraints of the budget and resources of the state more generally. But I think you don't always need money to do good for young people. But I should stress, it's not as if the state from above should deliver to the youth below, so to speak. The youth themselves also have to take some responsibility for their own future, their collective future, and their personal and individual future. The state is very challenged now, like all states are, world over with COVID-19 and its implications. But precisely because of COVID-19, we in this country and other states will have to do more for young people. So I would say the National Youth Development Agency needs to do far more. In my view, they haven't performed anywhere near how they should. They've had brief moments where they performed well, but overall, if you consider the considerable budgets they've received, nowhere near what they need, but certainly enough to do more than they've done, I think the NYDA needs to be revamped and improved. I also think the youth structures of the ANC, without a youth league, which is yet to be reconstituted, is a national task force that's seeking to do that, but lockdown and so on, that's been postponed yet again, understandably this time. I think the youth league needs to be strong. The Young Communist League, I serve in the Communist Party. Our own Young Communist League is nowhere near what it should be. The Progressive Youth Alliance, the structures of the university, COSAS, all of them, all the structures linked to the movement that I come from, need to be strengthened and supported more by those of us who are senior. But they also need to form more for themselves. They also need to, like the ANC as a whole, to reduce the infighting and to unify and become stronger. But so too must the youth structures of the DA and other political parties. And while they have ideological and policy differences, there are also issues surely they have in common as young people, despite their ideological divides. And one would like to see a broader coming together at that level, while retaining the specific ideological and political identities, working together. There's not much I could say, but for now, I think that it's a combination of state and civil society and young people themselves. Many young people have taken it upon themselves to improve their lives, and they've done very well. And every now and then there are articles about them in the media, on TV, in the print media, and the like. We need to listen to them. But you also need COSATU to work closely with youth. They've now got a youth desk, as indeed have to some extent, the ANC Women's League, they've got a women's youth desk. They seem to be doing very well. So all of us, individuals, civil society, the state, we all need to do more business also. Although they are doing something in this regard, we turn it like they need to do more.
I like the fact that you touched on business. I know that you are a Marxist believer. And I would like to ask you, how do you think the country could use the Marxist system to address the high youth unemployment and promote social justice?
Well, obviously, in the ANC, we are a broad front of a range of people. We broadly are together because we identify with the Freedom Charter. So we have within our ranks people who are Marxists. Most of them would be in the Communist Party, like myself, but others outside of the Communist Party. And we also have free marketeers and a range of diverse, let's say, ideological strands in between. But despite these different strands, we share a common overall framework within which we operate. So if you like, the ANC is to some extent, to other extent, a site of class struggle also. And so it has been, we still continue to define ourselves as a national liberation movement, not a narrow political party, certainly not simply a parliamentary party. We have a parliamentary arm, but, we retain our character as a national liberation movement, and we're in alliance with the SACP and COSATU with the ANC. And we argue that the tasks of national democratic transformation are unfulfilled. They're ongoing, and we've been at it since the breakthrough of 1994, but we're nowhere near completion of it. So we retain the alliance, the tripartite alliance, and of course we're in good sync as well. So how would a socialist perspective help youth? Quite simply, because our argument as Marxists now would be that we think that unemployment is an indispensable part, an endemic part, if you like, of the capitalist system. And if you operate by market forces, you invariably are going to have a pool of unemployed labor. People are employable but are not actually employed. And we think that the free market alone cannot deliver full employment. The state has to become involved. And we think that in the first instance, as the ANC now, a mixed economy is our answer. As the Communist Party, we don't argue that at this age you can create a socialist society. We argue that we as communists, and we do it openly, should engage within the ANC and independently outside the ANC, and we should engage within the alliance and outside the alliance to foster the conditions of socialism. So it's not as if we think socialism is on the agenda now. We don't see any major differences between the ANC and ourselves in trying to restructure the economy at this stage in the COVID-19 circumstances, where there's increasing agreement that the ANC should have a more state-oriented role while recognizing the crucial importance of the private sector. So if you like, the ANC is, if you want to use international idiom, a social democratic party, a left social democratic party, which believes both the state and the market have a role to play, and each can assist the other. So you can get your profits, but at the same time, you can also contribute to development and the delivery of services. So at this stage, I would say that as Marxists, our view would be that the ANC government and the ANC should engage more vigorously with the media, with the private sector, and civil society. Headlines should be used far more. And far more needs to be done through these cooperative endeavors and social compact that's being brewing now in the COVID-19 circumstances. We may need to formalize it through NEDLAC. But there you are. There is a term for the private sector to play a role without whom we cannot survive, and for the state to play a role without which the private sector cannot survive. The trade unions have a crucial role to play in this regard also. So what we're saying is that it is through creating the conditions for the ANC to become more social democratic at this stage and turn more toward the state-led part than we have had until now, and not just the Reconstruction and Development Program, the RDP as it's called, on the basis of which the ANC came to power in 1994. It's in that direction as communists we tried to nudge the ANC. And the more that happens, the more we think it creates the conditions for dealing with the private sector having its profits and youth employment being secured, and more generally employment being secured, bearing in mind the extremely challenging circumstances the whole global economy is in, let alone ours, given COVID-19. It's through that process that we think that conditions can be created for a stronger base for a move towards socialism. And our view would be the working class, bearing in mind also the working class is shrinking with robotics and artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, alliance of the working class, the rural poor, the youth, and the radical intelligentsia, and sections of the progressive bourgeois or petty bourgeois will work towards creating a socialist society. That's a long-term project, my brother. It's not going to happen overnight. Yes. But we forgot what we are actually clear about as communists. The capitalist system will not succeed in substantially reducing inequalities in society or in creating significant employment. But that even in a socialist society, we will need the private sector, I think is obvious, at least to me, and I think many other Communist Party members. Look, if you look, my friend, at this current global COVID crisis, this pandemic, ultimately, it is the capitalist class that has contributed disproportionately to the crisis we currently have, with industrial emissions, with ignoring the warnings of climate change. I mean, it's not as if we haven't known that this sort of pandemic's been looming. For years now, climatologists, left-wing environmentalists, NGOs which take up the issue of climate crisis, climate change, have been warning that we are interfering far too much with nature. And the consequences are that we are going to get, amongst other negative, destructive forces emerging, pandemics. I am not a scientist, my friend. I go by what I read, and even the scientists can't agree. But there's some germ of truth, surely, Kujla. You probably know more about these things than I do, because you know people like you online all the time and so on. I think it's reasonable to say, and I hope I'm not wrong, and I'm not a scientist, may I repeat, that to the extent that bats and pangolins have contributed to the outbreak of this COVID-19 pandemic, it is partly because the environment that they are in has been badly transformed by the inroads made by industry and other sections of the capitalist classes, right? They are only searching for profits. And it's their greed, which led to the 2008 global financial crisis. It's their relentless search for profits at all costs. Ignore the environment. Look at what Trump says. Look at what Boris Johnson would do. Look at Bolsonaro in Brazil. Or look at Modi in India. Or look at the right-wing parties in Europe. They don't care. Even now, instead of finding the right balance between health considerations and economic considerations, they tend towards profit and the economy. They don't care about the working class particularly, or enough. So the balance, we shouldn't polarize this debate of health and economy. They're interrelated in this particular context we're in, and you need to find the right balance. So what I'm saying, my friend, if you look also at the phenomenal growth of technology, if you look at robotics, if you look at artificial intelligence, things your generation knows more about than me, if we can do all of that, why did we not use all the growth and advances, the phenomenal advances in science and technology, to prepare for this pandemic? Because there were profits there. Now that we're in this crisis, the pharmaceutical companies are scattering. And there's a whole lot of debates about ownership and so on of a vaccine that might emerge, and will it be restricted to a country and so on. And ultimately, who's been mainly responsible for transferring this virus, if not the upper classes and the middle classes? Who uses airplanes? Who's been flying from China to the US and vice versa? So this pandemic is yet another example of, capitalism has got a considerable strength. Even Marx says it develops forces of production, it leads to enormous economic growth, it spreads also wealth to some extent, but ultimately it cannot create a civilized society. Social democracy, which is still a capitalist society, can advance the conditions of the poor and the working people, but the gap between the rich and the poor remains. So what I'm saying, my friend, is that we need to have, if we learn anything at all from this crisis, it is the need for us to not allow the capitalist classes to pursue profit at all costs. They have to be curtailed by appropriate legislation and state intervention the world over and by the multilateral institutions. We engage with them, yes, and with civil society and the working people and so on and their representatives. But ultimately, popular democracies need to actually take control and allow them to have their profits, but only limited means. But also ensure that the value of what they secure in technology, in advances in science and so on, benefit human beings more generally. If, my friend, we had directed these advances in robotics, artificial intelligence, and the 4IR towards human need, it is more likely that we would have anticipated this pandemic. It's more likely, I am no scientist again, that we would have been in a better position to deal with the effects of the pandemic, and maybe even in a better position, probably in a better position, to get a vaccine quicker.
Mr. Karim, actually part-time, so, this is my last question. Currently, I'm 16 years old, and the ANC Youth League, it allows members to join from the age of 14, 15, if I'm not mistaken. So, pardon me if I am mistaken. I would like to know, what should make people of my age, or my youth from within the school ages, join the ANC Youth League, and what should make us, the youth, vote for ANC in next year's local election?
Well, firstly, I think I must commend you and your outfit for organizing a series of seminars. That you're 16 is even more commendable. So this is very inspirational. And this lifts the spirit of people of my generation, because it suggests here's the future. Now, should you join the Youth League? Obviously, I'm going to say yes, but with no illusions. Even my own communist parties, young communists, with no illusions. We need to democratize the Youth League. We need ordinary people at branch level to have far bigger say on the Youth League elections and leadership and the policies. I think at this stage, there is no effective alternative to the ANC. Yes, we're extremely challenged. Yes, we've been mismanaging the country. Yes, sections of our movement are corrupt. Everybody knows that. As I say, even the peasants in Mongolia know that. There's nothing to hide. And whoever sees me saying this knows that a lot of us say this. You might not think so outside the movement, but we do. So we've done many wrong things. But overall, since 1994, we have done far more good things than bad things. It's the bad things that go into the public space. And yes, we deserve the criticism, but we also need acknowledgement. Despite all the challenges, right? We are handling COVID-19 very well. Yes, there are glitches here and there and faults, but overall, we've been complimented by the World Health Organization and other international bodies. While pointing to the abuse of the army, it's unforgivable, and the abuse by the police, unforgivable. They must be acted upon by the courts and other institutions. That is clear. But overall, we've done well. Only the ANC could have done that. And despite all our mistakes, 58% of the people or thereabouts voted for us last year. There is no non-racial, social democratically oriented alternative to us. Maybe by the time you twice your age, there may be an alternative to the ANC. Now there isn't. It's either the ANC or a series of coalition governments which will always be unstable. You look at Italy for 30 years or more, they're unstable coalition governments. They can't survive. Even right now, Italy's battling. India had it after the Congress movement, which in many respects shares our history. After the Congress movement got defeated, the Indian Congress, for like 30 years or so, you'd have coalition governments, far left and far right, uniting for a brief while, and then they have feuds and fights over ministerial positions and they collapse. Look at local government elections. These coalitions, they don't work. So right now, you're stuck with the ANC. So I would urge you and your generation to enter the ANC, bring in fresh ideas, the Youth League, infuse it with new blood, infuse it with new energy. You're young. Your future is long years ahead of you. I mean, you've got many of those years. I'm 64, my brother. Probably 4 times your age, my friend. You could be my great grandson. So all I'm telling you is join the ANC Youth League. But for those who don't want to be in politics, so what? Go into civil society. Join a youth club if you have such in your township or wherever you are. Join any civil society organizations. But the principles must be basic, wherever you are. Non-racialism, commitment to reducing inequalities, ensuring youth employment, ensuring better deals in higher education and basic education. So those are the things. Whether you're civil society or ANC Youth League, you don't want to be a political party. My own view of the DA, I don't want to be rude here, and there's no DA person to reply, is that they are completely, we have our own internal divisions, they are completely incoherent, and increasingly frenetic, and increasingly irrelevant. The leader effectively boils down to saying, end all the lockdown restrictions, utterly absurd. Who, by the way, is most suffering the consequences? It's disproportionately working people and poor income people. Yes, we shouldn't racialize the issue. People of all classes and all strata and all racial backgrounds are dying. Upper class people and unemployed. But primarily in South Africa, and look at today's paper and yesterday's paper of the study, it's disproportionately African people and so-called colored people who are dying. And I'm sure working class youth in the Indian community and maybe in the white community, fringes. Now, they don't have an empathy within the African population, for example. No, there is a significant growth in the support base. Look at the May 2019 elections. The EFF, I think, is actually ultimately a very conservative party, despite its leftist pretensions. My own view is that they're not really a Marxist-Leninist party, but they will not agree with me. I mean, I really don't conceitedly take them. They're quite a conservative, backward party, really, pretending to be left-wing. But they will argue with me differently, and know that you are going to engage with them. You haven't already.
I haven't already engaged with them. I'm going to speak to a lady from VF Plus this Saturday, and then I'm planning on speaking to one of their ladies next week, Saturday.
Fine. Anything else, my friend?
Nothing else. Thank you so much, Mr. Karim, for joining us on today's interview.
Good luck with
I
your
will send you the link and everything once it's done. So if you want to share it or watch it later on YouTube and on Instagram. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been an honor meeting you.
Well, it's an honor meeting you, and thanks for a very inspiring project and very good questions. Thank you indeed.
Okay, thanks.